there, this is Jenny from the Sewing Palace in Helena, Montana. Today's short video, we're going to show you how to make a cute little decorative pillow with piping. This is a Robert Kaufman fabric that's woven gingham check, and we have an Essex linen as the piping with a 1/2 inch piping. We're going to use a couple of cool tools, which is the zipper foot, piping, a pillow form, some fun fabric, a 1/4 inch foot, and a walking foot. Let's get started. First, you'll want to start by collecting a few supplies. So the fabrics that I've collected are these solid fabric, which is going to be my accent, and it is an Essex linen from Robert Kaufman. I bought 1/3 yard of that. And then I also have this Essex linen. It's a woven gingham check, so it's pretty on both sides. I bought 1/2 yard of this one. And when you're working with a check or a plaid, there's a couple of techniques that make it helpful to keep it straight, so I'm going to show you that. And then the piping. So this is going to be the piping that goes around the circumference of the pillow, and I have 1.125 of that. The pillow form is 12 inch by 16 inches. So this is the pillow form. It's just a small, simple rectangular pillow, and it's 12 inches by 16. And then a couple of tools and accessories that are helpful is a matching thread. So I have an ecru kind of colored thread, and then some wonder clips to hold everything together, some scissors, a measuring tool and mat, and a rotary cutter. And then there are 2 presser feet that you'll want to collect. One is for basic construction, and the one that I'm going to be using is my 1/4 inch foot. That is number 37. And I have dual feed on my machine that I'm using, so that has the letter D, so a 37D. If you don't have a 37D, you'll want a basic construction foot, which could be your basic number 1 foot, your all-purpose foot. Any of those feet will work. But the most important foot for doing piping is a zipper foot. So this one is for a Bernina, a 4, and you can kind of see it looks like it has a little ski, and you'll move the needle to the right or left. And for my machine, again, I have dual feed, so I have a 4D in my hot little hand. I wanted to add this presser foot in particular when you're working with plaids or gingham. This is called a walking foot or an even feed foot. It's foot number 50 for Bernina. It has a mechanical fork that goes up and down as you're sewing, and it helps feed the layers. So it has a feeding force underneath as it's sewing. The components move, and it helps feed your fabric evenly. So when you're sewing a small print like this that you want the lines to line up, a walking foot or an even feed foot would be a great tool. Step 1, I'm going to cut 3 pieces out of this gingham check. And since my pillow form measures 12 by 16, I'm going to cut the front first. So I'm going to cut a 12.5 by 16.5 inch piece. When I'm cutting a check like this, I'm going to do something that is going to keep it on grain, which is tearing it. So when I do the measuring, I'm not going to include the selvage, so I'm going to cut just inside the selvage and tear along that selvage. So the selvage has those little dots, so I'm going to cut right here. And then I'm going to tear the length of that, and you'll see as it tears, it's going to tear along this woven string or fiber, and right there is my torn edge. When I cut the fabric itself, I also tore it. So you can see I am still on grain, and now I'm going to measure 16 inches over along this length and tear up. So I've got my 0 point here, and I'm going to go all the way over here, and there is 16 inches. I'm going to add 1/2 inch. So I'm about 2 little bricks past. So this is where I'm going to tear for my 16.5 inch measurement. Now I have a 16.5 inch piece. I then also need to measure up 12.5 inches. So I have the main rectangle for the front. Now that I have my main panel, which is 12.5 by 16.5, I'm just going to apply a little bit of starch and get the wrinkles out and get the edges even. So I'm using some Best Press, just slightly spritz it. When I'm on my woolly mat, I'm just going to iron it so it's nice and even. I will trim any threads that are excess along the edge and make sure I still have a piece that is 12.5 by 16.5. Now that I have my piece all ready and measured, you can do a small zigzag stitch to prevent the fray, or you can use an overlocker and just finish that edge so it won't fray. I'm going to use a Bernina overlocker and do a 3-thread overlock just to finish that edge. I have the edge all serged, so this will prevent fraying with a overlocker stitch. I'm now ready to create the piping using my accent fabric. My piping is a 1/2 inch and it will kind of squish down a fair amount. And I've decided to cut strips that are 2 1/4, enough to fit around the circumference of my pillow. So I'm going to cut 3 strips at 2 1/4 and join them end on end. So I now have probably a 60-inch piece of piping fabric. I'm then going to insert the piping inside and wrap it over and use my wonder clips. So I'm going to wonder clip all along this edge in order to encompass the piping and line up the raw edges. Once I have this all clipped, I will start to sew using my zipper foot to encompass this piping inside of the fabric. Sewing on a Bernina 590, I'm going to be using the 4D presser foot. So I'm going to go into the foot menu and select the 4D foot. Once I have the foot selected, I will then apply the foot and engage the dual feed. My foot is on and I have the dual feed engaged. I'm then going to use my machine and move the needle so that it clears the stitch area. So if we focus in on that, when your needle goes down, you want to make sure it clears the foot area, that it is not in the center. I will align the raw edge of my fabric to the right. And now I'm going to just be basting this in so that the raw edges of the fabric are along on top of each other and the piping is encompassed inside. To get started, we are going to baste the piping along the whole edge of the pillow, pivoting on the corners and going all the way around. To get started, the beginning of the piping will be pulled off and the bulk of the fabric will hang off the edge of the fabric. So when you're starting, this is going to have a fair amount of collection of fabric, so take your time. I am using the 1/4 inch foot. And in order to get over this bulk, you might need to lift your presser foot, kind of resituate the fabric, and put it back down, stitching a little at a time because this is quite thick. Once you've got over the bulk of the fabric, you will then sew all along this edge using a slight seam, just basting that into place. Once you approach the corner, this is the edge of my pillow main fabric and my piping is hanging off. I'm going to sew until I want to reach a 1/4 inch or a basting stitch pivot point. So that's about right here. A pair of tweezers or a stiletto to hold that fabric in place so that you reach just that point, and then you'll sink your needle, raise your presser foot, pivot the fabric, and then you'll pull your piping around that corner. And then continue basting the piping onto that main piece. I'm coming around to where I started, so this is the point where I started, and I'm going to overlap this piping and sew over those multiple layers. This is going to be quite thick, so take your time. You might need to lift your presser foot in order to get it up and over those layers. Kind of getting up and over the hump. I'm over the hump, and now I'm just going to tailor this other piece off this direction. have my main panel and I have basted the piping along the raw edge. This is where I started and I tailored it onto the fabric, and then I came back around and tailored it off the fabric. So I will trim these two pieces off, and then I will sew around the edge with a zipper foot so that I can get the stitching really close to this piping and nice and tight. I'm now using my zipper foot and I am stitching very close to the piping. The piping and the fabric are already basted together, and I'm getting that stitch as close to the piping as possible, kind of applying pressure on the left-hand side so that it stays nice and tight to that piping. I'm getting ready to approach a corner. A stiletto or tweezers would be helpful. I just have some tips of scissors, so I'm going to sew to this point. Sink my needle in the fabric and the piping, then raise my presser foot and sew down the new side, making sure that the stitch is very tight along the edge of the piping. I'm now approaching the overlap, so there is a fair amount of bulk right here and when it comes back off. So you're going to want to use caution here so that you don't break a needle or force anything. I'm going to create an envelope closure for the back of this pillow. That means I'll have two pieces that slightly overlap so that I can stuff the pillow in through that opening. The height of this pillow is 12. The width is 16. Half of it would be 12 by 8. The other half would also be 12 by 8. I need to add a little bit of fabric so that those pieces overlap. So I'm going to add 2 inches in width to each piece. So it'll be 12 by 10 and another 12 by 10. I'll do the same method, which is measuring and tearing the fabric prior to serging it. This will keep the fabrics on grain. I will press these two pieces and then serge around them. For my pillow front, I will then create these two pieces that will create an envelope. So there's one 12-inch by 10-inch, and here is the other 12-inch by 10-inch. I have serged around each piece, and I'm going to do a small hem on one piece. So I'm going to fold it, and I'll use my walking foot in order to keep those plaids lined up. So it's folded over to the wrong side, pressed and top stitched. Now I'm ready to top stitch this one piece so that that hem stays over and is nice and straight. If you don't have a walking foot, use lots of pins, because as this layer gets fed, you can get a little ripple and the plaids will not line back up. So a walking foot will help that, or you can use lots of pins. Here is the Bernina walking foot that I'm going to apply. The fork goes over the needle bar, so as the needle bar moves up and down, the fork will go with it. So I'm just moving the hand wheel so that you can see the needle bar going up and down. You will then put your thumb underneath the fork and place it onto the needle bar. Once it's on the needle bar, you'll then slide the foot into place. My walking foot is now on, the needle is in the center, and I'm ready to stitch. I'll lay my pillow right side up, and then the piece that I have hemmed, which has the finished edge, will go down next. Then the piece that is unfinished will lay down right side down. Make sure these pieces are right side down. You will then take your time clipping or pinning all these edges together. You will then sew it with your zipper foot. I just wanted to give you guys a visual of how much I pinned it in order to hold that piping in place. So I have the wrong side of the pillow back, the piping in between, and then the front. So they're all laying right sides together, and the hemmed side is down first, and I'm going to sew around it with my zipper foot. I'm not going to sew over the pins, but I have moved the needle as far to the left as possible. I just realized I didn't have my dual feet engaged. So I've swung the needle far to the left, that direction, and I'm going to apply pressure here to the piping and do a straight stitch all the way around. Now that I've sewn all the way around the pillow, I will turn it right side out. As you press around your pillow, you want to check that piping and make sure it's nice and tight on both the front and the back, making sure that there's no stitching that is visible along the edge of the piping. Once you're all pressed, you will then stuff it with your pillow form. Thanks for joining me and making this cute little pillow. A couple of things I might change in the future. I think I'd cut the piping 2.5 inches and I only needed 2 strips. The other thing is I would pre-serge the piping fabric ahead of time so that it was all finished. And last but not least, I might add a little label. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day. Bye-bye. Happy sewing.